Bill Gates is now the largest private farmland owner in America. Not the largest landowner, that's someone else with forests and ranches, but farmland specifically. The guy who made billions from Windows and Microsoft Office now owns 275,000 acres of dirt spread across 19 states. That's an area bigger than the entire city of Los Angeles. He's got cornfields in Nebraska, potato farms in Washington, carrot fields in Florida, soybean operations across the Midwest. His investment firm has spent over $500 million buying farmland over the past decade. And here's the thing that nobody can quite figure out. Why? Why is a tech billionaire who lives in a lakefront mansion in Seattle buying farmland in states he probably couldn't find on a map? What does the guy who warned us about computer viruses know about growing corn? When reporters ask him, he gives vague answers about productivity and climate change. His spokespeople say it's just a good investment managed by his team. But when you start digging into the numbers, when you look at what farmland actually returns compared to stocks, when you see what other billionaires are quietly doing, a different picture emerges. This isn't about farming. This is about something way bigger. Let me show you what's really going on. The story starts in 2017, but nobody noticed at the time. That year, a Canadian pension fund decided to sell off a huge chunk of their American farmland holdings. They'd been buying up agricultural properties for years as a safe, steady investment, but they needed liquidity. So they put $500 million worth of farmland on the market. The buyer wasn't listed publicly. The sale happened through shell companies with names like Edna Farms, Willowdale Farms, Merrick County Farms, Dovehaven Ranch, Champion Valley Farm. Boring names, forgettable names, the kind of names you'd scroll past without thinking twice. But if you trace the ownership through layers of LLCs and business addresses, they all led back to one place, a single-story brick building in Kirkland, Washington, the headquarters of Cascade Investment, Bill Gates' personal investment firm. In Nebraska alone, Gates spent $113 million buying farmland between 2017 and 2022. Most locals had no idea. The chairman of Holt County, where Gates owns about 8,500 acres, said if you asked people on the street who owns Edna Farms, nobody would even know what it was. People work on those farms, rent the land, drive past it every day, and have no clue one of the richest men alive owns it. That's by design. Gates didn't buy this land to become a farmer. He didn't buy it to make a statement. He bought it quietly through shell companies across nearly 24 states, targeting specific types of properties with specific characteristics. As of 2025, Gates owns approximately 275,000 acres of farmland. Most sources say 19 states, some say 17, depending on recent sales. The exact number shifts because he's still buying and occasionally selling, but the scale is undeniable. He's the 43rd largest landowner in America overall, but when you narrow it down to just farmland used for crops, he's number one. To put that in perspective, that's more farmland than the entire country of Cape Verde. If you laid it out in a square, it would be about 20 miles on each side. And it's not random parcels scattered everywhere. It's highly productive agricultural land in states like Louisiana, Arkansas, Nebraska, Arizona, Washington, and Florida. The properties aren't run by Gates himself. He's not out there driving a tractor. They're managed by professional farm managers at Cottonwood Ag Management, a subsidiary of Cascade Investment. The farms operate like any other commercial farming operation. They grow crops, lease land to local farmers, generate income through harvests and rent. But here's where it gets interesting. When you start looking at the returns farmland generates compared to other investments, you realize why someone with Gates' resources would put hundreds of millions into dirt. Let's talk numbers. From 1992 to 2020, farmland returned an average of 11% per year. The S&P 500 during that same period, about 8%. So farmland outperformed the stock market by roughly 3% annually for nearly 3 decades. But that's not even the interesting part. The interesting part is how farmland performs during the times when everything else is falling apart. During the dot-com crash in the early 2000s, the S&P 500 dropped 49% from its peak. Farmland? It posted 7% returns, just kept chugging along like nothing happened. During the 2008 financial crisis, the stock market fell 37% in a matter of months. People lost half their retirement accounts. Farmland that same year, it went up 16%. Not down, up. In 2020, when COVID hit and the S&P dropped 37% between February and April, farmland posted positive returns. Again, like clockwork. There's a pattern here. Farmland doesn't crash when markets crash. It doesn't even slow down much because people still need to eat, crops still grow. Demand for agricultural products stays relatively stable no matter what's happening on Wall Street. And that's just the appreciation side. Farmland generates 2 types of returns. First, the land itself goes up in value over time. That's the appreciation. But second, and this is key, it generates income every single year through either crop sales or lease payments to farmers who rent the land. Compare that to stocks. With stocks, you're hoping the price goes up and maybe you get a dividend. The S&P 500's dividend yield right now is around 1.3%. Farmland's income yield is typically higher, plus you get the appreciation on top of that. But the real kicker is volatility. From 1992 to 2020, farmland had a standard deviation of about 6.9%. The S&P 500, around 17%. That means farmland is roughly 1/3 as volatile as stocks. You get better returns with way less gut-wrenching ups and downs. Since 1990, farmland has had exactly 0 years with negative returns, not one. Meanwhile, the stock market has had plenty of down years where you lose money. If you're someone like Bill Gates with tens of billions to protect, farmland starts looking really attractive. It's not about getting rich. He's already rich. It's about preserving wealth across decades without the roller coaster. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Inflation. Farmland is one of the best inflation hedges that exists. There's about a 70% correlation between farmland returns and the consumer price index. When inflation goes up, farmland values and crop prices tend to go up too. Compare that to gold, which everyone thinks of as the classic inflation hedge. Gold's correlation to inflation? Way lower. Farmland beats it by a mile. Think about why that makes sense. When the dollar loses value, the price of food goes up. When food prices go up, the value of the land that produces that food goes up. And the income generated by selling crops goes up. It's a natural hedge built into the asset itself. So if you're Bill Gates and you're looking at a world with massive government debt, central banks printing money, long-term inflation risks, and stock market valuations at historic highs, where do you put your money? Farmland starts looking pretty smart. But there's one more layer that most people completely miss, and it's maybe the most important part of the whole story: water rights. When you buy farmland in many states, especially in the arid West, you're not just buying dirt, you're buying the legal right to access water. And in a world where water is getting scarcer, those rights are becoming incredibly valuable. A Saudi dairy company a few years back bought thousands of acres of alfalfa fields in California. Not because they wanted to farm in America, because it was cheaper to buy land with water rights in California and ship the crops to Saudi Arabia than it was to buy and transport actual water. Think about that. Water rights attached to land are so valuable that it makes economic sense to grow crops on one continent and ship them across the ocean rather than figure out water access locally. Gates owns significant farmland in Arizona, California, and other water-stressed regions. The value of those properties isn't just the soil, it's the water access. As climate change intensifies, as droughts become more common, as cities and industries compete for limited water supplies, those rights are going to be worth more and more. And here's the thing. You can't create more farmland easily, not high-quality farmland with good soil, good water access, and good infrastructure. The supply is basically fixed. Actually, it's shrinking. Every year, farmland gets converted to housing developments, shopping centers, roads, solar farms. The total amount of agricultural land in America has been declining for decades. So you've got an asset with limited supply, consistent demand because people need food, inflation protection, steady income, low volatility, and embedded water rights that are becoming more valuable. If you're thinking long-term, like generational wealth preservation, it's hard to find a better asset class. That's what Gates figured out, or more accurately, that's what the investment team at Cascade figured out and he signed off on. Gates isn't alone in this. Jeff Bezos owns 420,000 acres of land, though much of that is ranch land in Texas, not active farmland. But he's in the game. John Malone, the media mogul, owns 2.2 million acres, making him the largest private landowner in America. Again, a lot of that is ranches and timberland, but the principle is the same. Hard assets, real things, not just digits in a computer. Stuart and Linda Resnick, the couple behind the wonderful company, own about 180,000 acres of farmland, mostly in California. They grow pistachios, almonds, pomegranates. They own Fiji water. They've built an empire around agricultural products and water. Ted Turner owns roughly 2 million acres, much of it ranches where he raises bison. Again, land, real assets, things you can touch. There's a pattern here. The ultra-wealthy are moving money out of purely financial assets and into physical assets. Land, farmland specifically, is at the top of that list. Some of this is just good diversification. If you've got $100 billion in tech stocks and they're at all-time highs, it makes sense to move some of that into something that won't crash if the market tanks. But I think there's something else going on. I think these guys know something, or at least they're hedging against something they're worried about. Look at who's buying. It's not old money families who've owned farmland for generations. It's tech billionaires, finance guys, people who made their fortunes in abstract digital financial markets. And now they're buying dirt. Gates made his money from software. Zeros and ones, code. Bezos made his money from an online marketplace, digital transactions. These guys understand better than anyone that most of modern wealth is just numbers in a database. It only exists because we all agree it exists. But farmland? Farmland is real. You can stand on it. It grows food whether the stock market is up or down. It doesn't care about interest rates or Federal Reserve policy or whether Bitcoin crashes. It just does what it's always done. There's a quote, I forget who said it, but it goes something like, buy land. They're not making any more of it. That's especially true for good agricultural land. And there's a darker version of that logic that I think is worth considering. If you believe that the current financial system is unstable, if you think there's a chance of major economic disruption, currency devaluation, or even social unrest, what's the safest asset to own? Land, productive land, land that can generate food. I'm not saying Gates is prepping for doomsday. I don't think he's building a bunker in Nebraska. But I do think his investment team is thinking in terms of worst-case scenarios. And in a worst-case scenario, owning the land that produces food is about as safe as it gets. There's also a geopolitical angle. China has been buying up farmland in the U.S. for years, though there's been pushback, and some states have passed laws restricting foreign ownership. Other countries do the same thing. They see American farmland as strategic. Food security is national security. When a billionaire buys tens of thousands of acres of farmland, they're essentially doing the same calculation at a personal level. It's food security, it's water security, it's a hedge against a lot of different kinds of risk that don't show up in a standard investment prospectus. Gates himself has said very little about why he's buying farmland. In a 2021 Reddit AMA, someone asked him directly. His answer was pretty vague. He said his investment group bought the land and that it's being used to improve farming productivity and address climate change. He mentioned sustainable farming practices and innovation. That's all probably true. But it's also not the whole truth. You don't become one of the richest people on the planet by making bad investments. Cascade Investment doesn't drop $600 million on farmland just to be nice to the environment. The real answer is probably simpler and more cynical. Farmland is a phenomenal long-term investment that most people can't access. It's expensive. It's liquid. You can't just buy 10,000 acres on your lunch break like you can buy stocks. It requires scale and expertise to manage. But if you have the capital and the team to do it, the returns are outstanding, and the risk is incredibly low. So Gates bought in big. Now here's the uncomfortable part. When billionaires buy up farmland, what happens to everyone else? Right now, most of Gates's farmland is leased back to local farmers. They keep farming it. The land stays in production. Gates collects rent, the farmers get to work the land they know, and from the outside, nothing changes. But over time, that dynamic shifts. Family farms that have been passed down for generations get sold off because the kids don't want to farm or can't afford to keep it. When that land goes on the market, it's not other local families buying it. It's institutional investors and billionaires. The result is a slow concentration of ownership, fewer people owning more land. And when that happens, you get less local control, less community investment, and more of a landlord-tenant relationship in agriculture. There's also a practical concern. When investment firms own farmland, they optimize for profit. That's their job. That means maximizing yields, minimizing costs, and sometimes making decisions that aren't great for long-term soil health or local ecosystems. A family farmer might let a field rest for a season to restore nutrients. An investment firm might push for continuous production because that's what the return model says to do. I'm not saying that's always how it plays out, but the incentives are different. Then there's the consolidation issue. As farmland ownership concentrates, so does market power. If a handful of entities own a significant percentage of farmland, they have influence over food prices, land prices, water access, and agricultural policy. That's a lot of power in very few hands. Some states have started to push back. North Dakota limits corporate ownership of farmland. A few other states have similar restrictions. But enforcement is tricky when ownership is hidden behind shell companies and layers of LLCs. The bigger question is whether regular people should even care that Bill Gates owns a bunch of farmland. And honestly, I'm conflicted on this. On one hand, if Gates is a good steward of the land, if he invests in sustainable practices, if he keeps it in production and doesn't just let it sit idle, maybe it's fine. Maybe it's even better than some alternatives where land gets paved over for strip malls. On the other hand, there's something fundamentally weird about one person owning 275,000 acres of American farmland when most Americans can barely afford to buy a house. It feels like the kind of thing that would have made the Founding Fathers deeply uncomfortable. They were really worried about concentrated land ownership because they saw how it created entrenched aristocracies in Europe. But here's what I think you should actually take away from this story. It's not about Bill Gates specifically. It's about what his investment decisions tell us about where smart money is moving. If the wealthiest, most informed people in the world are buying hard assets, physical assets, real things instead of financial instruments, that's a signal. They're hedging against financial instability, inflation, currency devaluation, or some combination of those risks, you probably can't go out and buy 10,000 acres of farmland, but you can think about what the same logic means for your own situation. How much of your wealth is in purely financial assets like stocks and bonds? Do you have any exposure to real assets, real estate, commodities, anything physical? I'm not giving investment advice here. I'm just saying there's a reason billionaires diversify into land. And that reason isn't complicated. Land is finite. Food is necessary. Water is scarce. Those facts aren't changing. There's also a broader point about food security. Right now, most people in developed countries don't think about food security. You go to the grocery store, the food is there, you buy it. But that system is more fragile than people realize. Supply chains, energy costs, climate disruptions, geopolitical tensions, all of it can affect food availability and prices. When billionaires buy farmland, they're ensuring that no matter what happens, they have access to a critical resource. That's not paranoia, that's just smart planning when you have the resources to do it. For the rest of us, we can't buy our own farms, but we can think about food security in smaller ways. Where does your food come from? How dependent are you on complex supply chains? If prices spike, are you prepared? These aren't crazy prepper questions. They're reasonable things to consider in an increasingly unstable world. And there's a political dimension here too. If you care about who controls food production, if you think there should be limits on how much farmland one person or entity can own, that's something you can advocate for. State legislatures make these rules. They can be changed. Some countries have strict limits on farmland ownership. In many places, you have to be a citizen or resident to own agricultural land. There is an argument that land, especially farmland, shouldn't be treated like just another financial asset because it's too important. It's infrastructure, it's food security, it's sovereignty. I don't know if I buy that argument completely, but I understand it. And I think it's a conversation worth having as more and more farmland gets bought up by fewer and fewer entities. So let me bring this all together. Bill Gates owns 275,000 acres of American farmland. He bought it quietly through shell companies over the past decade. He's the largest private farmland owner in the country. He didn't buy it because he loves farming. He bought it because his investment team understands that farmland delivers consistent returns with low volatility, acts as an inflation hedge, generates steady income, and comes with valuable water rights. In a world of financial uncertainty, it's one of the safest long-term bets you can make. He's not alone. Other billionaires are doing the same thing. Bezos, Malone, the Resnicks, all of them are moving money into land. Hard assets, real things. This is a signal. It tells you where the smart money thinks risk is accumulating. It's in the financial system, in currencies, in debt, in the abstract world of numbers and leverage. The hedge against that risk is physical assets, land, commodities, water rights, things that exist regardless of what happens to the dollar or the stock market. For most people, that probably means thinking about diversification differently. It might mean holding some real estate. It might mean being thoughtful about where you have exposure to inflation or currency risk. And it definitely means paying attention to who owns the land that produces your food. Because that's not just an investment question. It's a sovereignty question. It's a food security question. It's a question about what kind of country we want to be. When one person can own 250,000 acres of farmland while most families are struggling to afford a house, something is out of balance. I don't have the answer to what the balance should look like. But I know it's worth asking the question. Your turn. Drop a comment. I want to hear real opinions. Because this isn't just about Bill Gates. It's about who controls the resources we all depend on. This is education and analysis, not investment advice. I'm not telling you to buy farmland or any other asset. I'm not a financial advisor. This is based on publicly available information and should not be considered guidance on what to do with your money. Do your own research, talk to professionals, make your own decisions.